Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all 389 Bach chorale harmonizations. Today we have quite a doozy. We have Liebster Gott, wann werd ich sterben, which translates to Dearest God, when shall I die? It's a very fascinating chorale. Just the orchestration, I guess. I don't really know how to comment on the way that Bach chose to write for the... well, we're going to go ahead and retry that. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Hello everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all 389 Bach chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Liebster Gott, wann werd ich sterben, which translates to Dearest God, when shall I die? This is a very fascinating chorale. I mean, you could probably gather that it's going to be an interesting chorale just from the way that Bach chose to write for the voices. This looks like more of a part that, or more of an orchestration that I guess was part of like, I don't know, like part of a cantata that was like from one of the non-chorale movements, like a chorus section rather than a chorale section, just because of the staggering of the voices, the fact that not all of the voices are present at all times. It's really fascinating, and it did make the analysis a little bit more challenging, but all in all, the harmony pretty much functions the way that it's supposed to. There are a couple of sections where, you know, it's nebulous when you say a modulation is going to take place. It's more so the fact that the piece is in the process of modulating. Trying to pinpoint exactly when it happens isn't what matters. What matters is that you can hear the fact that the piece has modulated. But I try to stay consistent with all of my analyses to reflect the fact that, you know, is there a common chord that's fueling this modulation, or is it a direct modulation? Most of the time it's a common chord in my eyes, but, you know, there's room for debate there. What matters is understanding the fact that the piece has modulated, which is something that I've talked about at length in all of my, well, not all, but many of my videos up until this point. But yeah, really fascinating chorale. I've been flipping through the pages of my my edition of the chorales that I've been using for my own personal analysis before I do the videos, and yeah, this one is it snuck up on me. I didn't realize how quickly we've gotten to it. I just looked at it and I'm like, wow, this looks very quirky in comparison to the regular texture of the rest of them. But I've already talked at length about it. Let's get right into the analysis. So we're in the key of E major. We start with this really strong E bass solo quarter note, and we end on an E major chord, so pretty firmly in the key of E major. You might notice that there are no fermate here as well, so you have to listen for the actual cadences. Thankfully, it is pretty easy to hear them just because you can kind of pick them out because of the texture, but it helps to have the chorale handy and to listen to people sing it as well. But I just used my piano reduction, and the first cadence that I heard, maybe you heard one in between now and then, it's right here, and it's a half cadence. As you can see, we cadence here on B major. That's the dominant of the key of E major. Whether you hear the cadence on beat 1 or you hear it on beat 2, I would make my argument that it happens on beat 2. We kind of have this interesting bass motive that carries through the cadence as well, which makes it kind of a weaker cadence in and of itself. But we'll just go ahead and mark 1 for this entire measure just because we have E, B natural, we have G sharps as well. And then we carry into the next measure where we get A, E, A, and C sharp. That's an A major triad in root position. Then we go back down to E, 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 G sharp, and B. This A is a 4-3 suspension over the bass, so just 4 to 1. Then we have F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and A. You might have gathered that this G is an accented non-chord tone. and it's really this F sharp we're looking at, so this is really just a root position, F sharp minor triad, or a 2 chord. We just have some filigree in the alto in anticipation for the cadence, which is usually when we get filigree, but like I said, there's no fermate here, so it's harder to, pick out the chords in some situations because the piece is much more contrapuntal homogeneously. Then we have D sharp, B, F sharp, and B. We actually have an A carrying over here, so we'll go ahead and call it a 5-6-5 chord, or in other words, a B7 chord over D sharp, just because the A carries over. And then we have E, B, E, and G sharp, another root position tonic triad, and then we cadence on 5, B, B, D sharp, F sharp. It's B major, passing tone in the bass, and then we get a little bit of a 6 here. A little bit of a, sorry, when I say a 6, I don't mean C sharp minor, I mean first inversion 5 chord, as D sharp is now in the bass. But because it's the only voice, it's kind of just like the bass has its own line, rather than it being a part of a vertical sonority. It's kind of interesting. But now, if we look ahead to the next cadence, which I think is at the end of the section, it's a perfect authentic cadence on B major. We're looking for a point in which we modulate, and because we have A sharps coming up on the 3rd beat of the next measure, I think modulation is imminent. So we're going to call this E major chord here, or E, G sharp, and we're just going to call this section right here a 1 chord, or an implied 1, and we're just going to go ahead and say that, you know what, we're in the key of B major here. I think you can make the argument that it happens here, bum, bum, bum. In fact, you know what, I am going to change it because bum, bum, bum. Hearing that as B is kind of, I would imagine, kind of a hard thing to hear. We're still in the key of B major here, or sorry, E major here, because we still have a very prominent E in the bass. And I'll say by the time we get to this E that's held over, we're in the key of B major, the C sharp minor chord, E, E, G sharp, and C sharp. That is a 6-6 chord, which I learned to avoid when I was in harmony class. We're going to go ahead and call this 2-6 in the key of B major. And then we have, some passing tones in the soprano and the tenor. It's about time for me to sharpen my pencil as well. We have E, C sharp, F sharp, and A sharp. That is an F sharp 7 chord over E, or in other words, a 5-4-2 chord with a passing tone in the bass and a chord tone in the soprano. We then have C sharp, D sharp, F sharp, and B. I think this C sharp is the outlier. It's a accented non-chord tone, and we have B here on the bass, B, D sharp, F sharp, and B. That would be 5-4-2 going to 1, which makes a lot more sense than trying to make sense of a chord of all the notes on the downbeat. We then have F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and B. We know that that's just a suspension, a 4-3 suspension to be more specific. That'd be a 5 chord, F sharp major. That carries into the next beat, and then we get 1. Now it's the same thing here. I forgot to add this, but this is actually our first ending, and this here is our second ending. I forgot to add that in my engraving software. Apologies. Thankfully I have the power to edit that after the fact. So we'll go ahead and just call this 1 as well. Looks kind of weird with the double ending without an analysis here. Okay, so same way as we kind of have 1 going up to 6, we kind of have 1 going up to 6 here as well. So there's kind of there's a little similarity between the two sections in that way. Now here's where the analysis is kind of interesting. I'd say that this was the hardest part of the analysis to really fully commit to, because I'm not 100% sure. So if we look here, we have B, D, and F sharp. It's very clear that this is a B major triad. But if we look what happens, we have our next cadence coming up here. It's probably best that I talk about it. And it is a half cadence in the key of C sharp minor. We cadence on G sharp major here, which is the dominant of C sharp minor. But instead of getting F sharp major on this beat, which is what we would expect if we were still in the key of B major, right? Because F sharp would be a major quality triad. We get F sharp minor. And F sharp minor is the 4 in the key of C sharp minor, which is where we're going to. So really, Bach doesn't leave us a lot of room to use a common chord here, but he clearly arpeggiates a B major triad here in the bass, and I hear it as B major, but there is some modulation going on here, because if you look at what's happening, C sharp, D sharp, E. This section just goes from F sharp up to C sharp, and then it pretty much outlines the C sharp minor scale in the bass. So I know that there's something conjoined. The keys are being conjoined here, but it doesn't sound like a direct modulation. So what I think Bach is doing, and like I said, I'm not 100% certain here, is that I think the modulation via common chord is happening here. So if we're modulating to the key of C sharp, this B would have to be a 7 chord. More specifically, it'd have to be a flat 7 chord, because 7 is usually diminished in minor keys. But because there's no leading tone, this is not B sharp, it's B natural, this would be a 7 chord. But what makes the analysis, I think, even shakier is the fact that it's followed by F sharp minor, F sharp, and A. And that would be a lowercase 4. This is perfectly fine if we're thinking purely in C sharp minor conditions, but usually 4 goes to 7, not the other way around. So I don't fully exactly understand what's going on here, but this could just be an example of an erratic progression, and Bach just trying to make sense of the melody using his own harmonic sensibilities. All in all, it's an interesting progression nonetheless. You expect F sharp, G sharp, A sharp here, but instead you get F sharp, G sharp, A, and that's what creates this interesting progression. But yeah, we get like a minor dominant sound, or 7 going to 4. But after that, the analysis is pretty straightforward. We have some passing tones in the upper voices leading into our 4 chord, and then we get C sharp, E, E, and G sharp. That's just our root position C sharp minor chord. We then get some passing tones in the lower 3 voices. They spell out a D sharp, F sharp, and G sharp. That would be like a thirdless dominant chord. So I don't think that's very consequential. Those are just passing tones, I believe. And then we get another C sharp minor triad, but this time it's over E. E, C sharp, G sharp, and C sharp. We then get some more tones. We get a chord tone here, a non-chord tone here, and a non-chord tone here. That spells D sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and C sharp. So not a tertian triad, not consequential. No need to analyze. And then we get the same chord again, because we get E, G sharp, and C sharp. Before we get F sharp, A, and D sharp. Now that is interesting. That I will analyze as a passing D sharp diminished triad in first inversion. 2/6 before we cadence on G sharp major. G sharp, D sharp, G sharp, B sharp. 2/6 wants to go to 5. And he does so via this leap of a minor 7th. Instead of just going up, he has this very quick minor 7th leap, and then he leaps up an octave again. Bach is truly an egalitarian composer, or was rather, as he wrote for all of the instruments. He kind of treated all of the instruments in the same way texturally. I want to make sure that I say that right, because Bach definitely cared about timbre. I think what he really did is he didn't write for instruments regarding like breathing a lot of times. He had the idea of what the melody was to sound like, and he gave it to the the instrument or the voice, sometimes without regard for comfort. I guess that's what I was trying to say. But we get a passing seventh in the bass, and if we look ahead to our next cadence, it happens right here. It happens on beat 3. Again, just like the previous cadence, but this one is another perfect authentic cadence back in the key of B major. So we're looking for a modulation point, and because we have F sharp and B natural, or sorry, A sharp and B natural here, I'm thinking it happens pretty quickly. So we're going to call this E, G sharp, and C sharp chord, which is another another C sharp minor chord in first inversion, which was like the last one we saw. We're going to call this 2/6 in the key of B major. Passing tones in some of the voices, more specifically the soprano and the tenor, before we get E, C sharp, F sharp, and A sharp. Again, another 5/4/2. So this is sort of what I'm hearing here, is another 2/6 to 5/4/2 progression with that sustained bass. Here it happens over a smaller, just a smaller proportion to the measure, but here it happens over 3 beats. So pretty cool. So 5/4/2, and then we get D sharp, D sharp, F sharp, and B. That is our tonic triad in first inversion, passing tone in the bass, and then we get F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and B. So what's going on here? So this C sharp, we're getting ready for a perfect authentic cadence, of course. So this is just a 5 chord, and this B right here is a 4/3 suspension over the bass. As we've seen before, sometimes the suspension isn't tied over, we just see the note repeated. We could, sometimes if we saw like an imaginary tie over these 2 B's right here, that would be a little bit more visually helpful. But instead, we get the 5 chord resolved with the actual third of the chord intact on beat 2 before we cadence on 1. Perfect authentic style. Okay, moving on. So we have a perfect authentic cadence next in this measure right here. And again, we're going back to the key of C sharp minor. So we're looking for a point to modulate to C sharp minor. Now, if we look at the melody, we still have A natural, which is, we have A natural now, which is indicative of the fact that we might be modulating in and around this point. So let's look for it. So again, we have a 1 chord that turns into a 6 chord after the cadence. So that's, when I'm looking for cadences and stuff, and when I'm looking for similarities between sections and, how they impact the form, I look for little patterns like that. Like we saw 1, and then we saw a chord turning into a 6 chord right after the cadence, a 1 chord turning to a 6 chord after the cadence, and, a 1 chord turning to a 6 after the cadence. There's clearly some intention here, right? So we have B, D sharp, F sharp, and A natural. See, this B right here would make, it would be tempting just to call this 5/3, but I think this A natural implies something more than just the 1 chord being a 1 chord. I think it's actually 5/4, because the 1 in a major key, or the 1 in any key, is the dominant of the 4. It's just in a major key, it takes the flat 7 in addition to the major triad and the tonic to contextualize that. If you already make a 1 chord major in a minor key, it has that effect, but you have to go sort of 2 layers deep to pick it out in a major key. So we get 5/4, and we would expect that to go to E major, E, B, F sharp, and G sharp. So we really, with this F, we kind of get an A here, yeah. So we have E, B, and G sharp, but with this suspension, this 9/8 suspension in the middle, this is definitely a 4 chord, But we have this F here that doesn't resolve until we get to beat 4, but at that point we already have a C sharp minor chord. So C sharp minor, C sharp, C sharp, E, and C sharp, that is our 2 chord in the key of B major, and we're going to call that now in the key of C sharp minor our 1. There's an argument to be made that that E could also be 3 in the key of C sharp minor, but I think 5 going to 4 here and then 4 going, it just kind of sounds like more here because we have G sharp going to C. This is the G sharp going to C sharp rather, and that bass movement is actually the more that I talk through it, it's really anyone's guess. To me, this is where I have it in my notes, but just know that saying that a modulation could happen on this 4 chord is fine as well. Like I said, this is really just like a modulation zone, so anything that's happening in this region right here, marking it as a modulation, I think you're good to go. At least, you know, that's sort of how I hear it, because we're seeing dominant movement here. And then immediately after this C sharp minor chord, we have A, D sharp, F sharp, and B sharp. So that right there is a very interesting chord because it is a B sharp fully diminished 7th, but the bass has the 7th, which is kind of an interesting voicing. So that would be a 7-4-2, and remember we're in the key of C sharp minor already, so it's no longer a secondary dominant functioning chord. And then now we see a double sharp. We don't see a lot of double accidentals in Bach's time. F sharp, F double sharp, E, A sharp, and C sharp. So this is an F sharp, F double sharp, fully diminished 7th chord, and we know F double sharp is the leading tone to G sharp. So this is 7-7 of 5 because G sharp is the 5th of C sharp minor. So we're getting ready for this perfect authentic cadence, and F double sharp is our substitute for 2 or 4. It's our predominant functioning chord. So then we get 5 immediately afterwards, right? G sharp, D sharp, G sharp, and B sharp because the sharp carries over. And then we cadence on 1. Perfect. All in all, even with the double accidentals and with the with all of the filigree going on, or all of the ornamentation and the counterpoint, the analysis is pretty straightforward. It's just deciding where the modulations happen. I'd say that's my weakest part as analysis, as an analyst. So we stay on a 1 chord, we get some leading tone stuff or some counterpoint in the inner voices. I don't think it's really enough to say that the overall harmony's changed, because really the chords still, the inner voices end up resolving to C sharp and E again, but I guess technically B sharp and D sharp kind of imply a little bit of like a passing 7, so we'll just mark that there before we go back to 1 again. And then we get C sharp and E, so it's kind of the same thing. These notes are held over, and then we get G sharp and D, so we get like a tritone, which is very interesting. I think that is worth analyzing actually, even though they are non-chord tones. We're going to call those 7 of 6 because G sharp is the leading tone to A, and A is the submediant in the key of C sharp minor. It's the 6, and we would expect that to go to A, right? A, C sharp, E, and C sharp. That is an A major triad if I've ever seen one. And I think at this point we have modulated, because we're not seeing any more accidentals that hint at C sharp minor anymore. Things have pretty much returned to their diatonic beginnings. We're getting ready for a perfect authentic cadence in the key of E major anyways. So let's go ahead and just say that we've modulated to the key of E major here, and this is now 4, because A is the subdominant in the key of E major. And then we have C sharp, E, and G. We're going to go ahead and just say that G, even though You could make an argument that, you know, this is a C sharp minor chord. I think this G sharp is kind of mimicking what happened in the bass before, so really it's the A we're listening for. So we're going to call this 6 instead of 6. We're going to call it 6 because it sounds more like a 4-6 chord to me rather than a 6 chord in root position. And then we have G sharp, B, D, and B. That is this D right here, or D sharp rather, is I'd say an accented non-chord tone. We kind of see this mirroring going on in all the voices. You see we have a leading tone going up, leading tone going up, leading tone going up. This is an accented non-chord tone, and really this is just an E major triad in first inversion, so it's just E major over G sharp. And then we have B, B, F sharp, D sharp, B, F sharp, and A. That is a B7 chord over D sharp, so 5, 6, 5. And then we have E, B, F sharp, and G. We know this F sharp is just a 9/8 suspension over the bass, so this is just an E major triad in root position. We then get A, C natural, F sharp, and D sharp. So we know that that is a D sharp fully diminished 7th chord over A. So that would be 7, 4, 3. And this C is just borrowing from the parallel minor. So usually we see C sharp, which would imply a half diminished chord, but here we have a fully diminished one. And I think that that's just for flavor. And we have the F sharp going down to E, the D sharp going up to E, and then we have A, F sharp, B, and D sharp. That is a B7 chord over A, so 5, 4, 2. B7 over A. And then we have A sharp, G natural, C sharp, and E. That's an A sharp fully diminished 7th chord, so another 7, 7 of 5 like we saw earlier. Kind of in anticipation for this perfect authentic cadence we got earlier. We had 7 in a similar inversion, this time not 4, 2 but 4, 3. 5, 4, 2 instead of 7, 7 of 5. But then we get a 7, 7 of 5 after the fact. So these cadences are very similar to one another, albeit not identical. And then we get B, F sharp, B, and E. Another 4-3 suspension over the bass. So that's a 5 chord. Again, we sort of have like a mirroring going on where we have this 4-3 suspension, and we have the tie over, and then we have the suspended note also ornamented in the tenor. Where did that happen earlier? Not to get hung up on it for too long. Right here. If this were tied over, we still have the suspended note from the soprano echoed in the tenor, so that's pretty cool. And then the chord gets resolved on beat 3 before we get a perfect authentic cadence on, beat 2. That's beat 2. The cadence happens on beat 3. But that being said, here's the analysis. This was a very wacky chorale, if for anything because of its texture. Somewhere between a chorale and just a chorus piece. When I think of a chorale, I think of a melody that has a regular harmonic rhythm where pretty much every note in the melody is harmonized. And here he achieves that, but there are clear gaps that I'm not used to seeing in his chorales, and it's definitely not something that's a regular occurrence. It might happen again, maybe even a couple more times, but it's much more common to see a melody with harmonic regularity regarding the texture. It's much more homorhythmic rather than contrapuntal. But that being said, this is a very fascinating chorale. I'm going to tuck this one into my back pocket just to have like a weird chorale to reference. But that being said, all in all, pretty straightforward chorale to analyze. Only thing that was really made difficult was, where the modulations happen, but that's continued to be a little bit of a struggle for me. Really what matters is that you identify the fact that a key change occurs. And when a key change does occur, marking it in the way that you feel is the most sensible is the way to go. But that being said, thanks for watching the video. Thank you for your continued support of the channel, and I look forward to tomorrow's analysis. Take care.